It's January 5th, 2024, and we're in London Euston Station to ride the Avanti West Coast service to Birmingham New Street. After having just spent 5 days in London, it was time for me to continue my journey to Birmingham and eventually the small town of Kidderminster for the Severn Valley Winter Steam Gala. To get there, I chose an afternoon service on Avanti West Coast, leaving out of London Euston Station. Avanti West Coast operates high-speed services along the West Coast Main Line using the Class 390 between London Euston and Glasgow Central in Scotland. The Class 390, nicknamed the Pendolino, formed the main rolling stock of high-speed, long-distance services along the West Coast Main Line and were inherited by Avanti West Coast by the former operator Virgin Trains. The Class 390 operates in a 9-car configuration with a first and standard class and a cafe car. Before taking my train, I had some time to explore London Euston Station. Compared to the other stations in London, it's actually a lot more modern, but it's definitely a lot smaller and much more underwhelming, as it doesn't have nearly the architecture of the older station buildings all around London. Boarding opens 15 minutes prior to the train's departure, and there's sort of a mad dash to get in line and have your ticket scanned before you enter the train. Admittedly, I'm not really sure why, as I didn't actually see a unreserved seating option when I booked this train, but maybe there's some kind of ticket I don't know about that does not get you a reserved seat. Either way, I had a reserved seat in Car E and a window seat.
Birmingham 15:45. That's due to arrive at Birmingham. Next week 15:50. Just quick run through the layout.
The aisleways are pretty crowded on these trains, so it takes a while to get to your seat, but eventually I'm there. This is one of the older Class 390s that is definitely in need of a refresh. These 390s are getting a new interior, but this is the older style. So there's a double seat. This is a standard class seat in a 2x2 configuration with a tray table and a net. Above your seat is your seat reservation with your name and your destination, which tells the people where the seat is reserved up to. There's also a reading light on the top and a sunshade. Each train car has a luggage rack on either end, and if you're American like me, you're going to need it because American-sized carry-ons do not fit on European-sized overheads. So into the luggage rack that went.
That's most important. Okay, great.
Shortly after boarding, the train departed on time at 14:40. It's about an hour and 16 minutes to Birmingham, and we were making 2 stops, one at Coventry and one at Birmingham International Airport. One thing I like about European trains is that oftentimes there is an indicator that tells you how full certain train cars are based off of the reservations. This train car was marked, I believe, yellow, and it was pretty full, but I was lucky enough to have the seat next to me open for the entire ride. I would not get this lucky later in my trip, but I definitely enjoyed it for this ride.
Coventry, Birmingham International. If you
London Euston Station is the originating point for a lot of Avanti West Coast services heading north. It is also the terminus for the London North Western Railway and a station along the London Overground. One thing I did a lot of in the UK is train spotting, and I definitely got a chance to train spot here at London Euston, and I have a video all about that. Make sure to watch that one after this one. Back on the train, we pass a yard with a couple of West Midlands new Class 370 units, which were mostly in testing. Some of them were in operation when I filmed this video. Pretty soon after leaving central London, our train hits its top speed of 125 miles per hour. What makes the Pendolino units special is that they can tilt, a lot like other tilting trains all around the world. The tilting for the Pendolino trains is important because the West Coast Main Line dates back to the Victorian age, and back then trains were not moving that fast, so they had plenty of leeway to make tons of curves. Well, when the trains start moving faster, physics catches up to you, and you can't negotiate those turns without tilting trains. Now back to my purpose for riding this train. Birmingham was not my last stop. At Birmingham, I would catch a West Midlands service to Kidderminster. I don't have footage of that because that train was extremely crowded and late because it had broken down in the rush hour, but this is definitely the more interesting train with better views and a better seat. Not being from the UK, I want to draw some comparisons between this train service in the UK and a similar train service in the United States. For starters, most train services in the US don't hit 125 miles per hour, except for a small section on the Bright Line and sections in the Northeast Corridor. Additionally, frequency is far better in the UK. I had tons of options within the hour on both Avanti West Coast and on the London Northwestern Railway. That being said, something I've actually never heard anybody talk about, and I will probably mention multiple times in my upcoming European train reviews, is that the trains in the United States are more comfortable. The seats are larger and they have more legroom. In this case, I was pretty comfortable, but in one of my next videos where I ride cross country, it was not so. At this point in the journey, I wanted to see what they had in the cafe car, as this is my first time on a long-distance European train, and I wanted to see if the cafe car stacked up to the Amtrak cafe cars I'm used to. The cafe is about half of a standard class car that has a couple pre-prepared snacks as well as a couple bottles of drinks and some liquor. The cafe car definitely compares to the Amtrak car. It's mostly just pre-prepared food. I got a meal deal, which is a staple in the UK apparently, and headed back to my seat. I'm not kidding, this is everywhere in the UK. You buy a sandwich, a snack, and a drink, and the sandwich is always super plain. I did pay £6, which is something like $8 or $9-ish. In the cafe car, I got to talking to some people who were from the UK, and I got to learn that a lot of British people have a lot of complaints about their train service. In the UK, the train operator, the rolling stock owner, and the track maintainer, Network Rail, are all separate private entities, contracted by the government to run 10 to 15-year contracts to operate these services. Avanti West Coast is one of these operators and has sort of a reputation for being unreliable, although it seems like they've improved. As of the recording of this video, about 90% of Avanti West Coast trains arrive within 15 minutes of their scheduled time, which is up from the previous year of 2022, which was 75%. Talking to British people about their trains, you get a sense that there is a lot of complaints and a lot of room for improvement. But when you compare it to American trains, this is definitely a lot better. And speaking of on-time performance, our train pulls in on time to the first station stop, Coventry.
Welcome on board this Avanti West Coast service.
At Coventry, just a few people get off, nobody gets on, and we're on our way to Birmingham International. On a pretty special note, our train is actually numbered 390001, indicating it was the first ever Pendolino built for mainline service.
We'll sort it. See it, say it, sorted.
Our train arrives on time into Birmingham International. Birmingham International is south of Birmingham, just outside of the city, and is about a 10 to 15 minute ride into Birmingham New Street. On the final leg of this journey, it's a good time to talk about the ticket price and how much I paid. I paid £11.85 with a young person's rail card. The normal fare for this train would have been £18. This is a pretty cheap train fare, especially considering the speed and distance I was going. I bought a standard class ticket with a included reserved window seat. I also booked this ticket direct through Avanti West Coast's website, although I've been using Trainline to book tickets as it was a lot easier to keep track of a lot of my tickets, and I used Trainline on other trains on my journey. The reason this ticket was cheaper than some comparable services was because I took it in the afternoon. In the UK, trains in the morning tend to be extremely expensive, as they're called morning peak hour trains, and as you take trains later in the afternoon and evening, they become far cheaper.
Now arriving into Birmingham Street. Birmingham Street is our final station stop with this service and will be terminating. All change at Birmingham Street. Please ensure that you take all of your luggage and personal items with you before you leave today. And do mind the gap train.
If traveling in the UK, make sure to take afternoon train journeys whenever possible, as this same journey could run you anywhere between £60 to £120 during the morning peak hours. Pulling into Birmingham New Street, we see a cross-country Class 170. Cross-country and Avanti West Coast are just two operators out of Birmingham New Street, which includes West Midlands Railways and Transit for Wales, as well as some other operators. Birmingham New Street is a pretty newly constructed station with a very modern concourse up above the station platforms. Our train arrives under the station and will take escalators up into the concourse. On the opposite platform, getting off our train, we see one of Avanti's very few Class 221s pulling into Birmingham. And we get one last look at our Pendolino 390001, the first Pendolino ever made. And my final thoughts. The Avanti West Coast service was fast, on time, and pretty dependable from what I saw. London Euston Station is pretty crowded and underwhelming, especially when compared to other stations. Birmingham New Street was pretty new, and the concourse is pretty impressive, although the underground platforms are pretty dingy. The Class 390 that I rode in was much in need of an overhaul. The interior was pretty dirty and worn out, but it was functional enough to get me there, so there's definitely that. I definitely would like to ride Avanti's new interior and review it. The overall price for the journey was definitely reasonable, and I'd recommend it. It was a great time, and I'm looking forward to riding and reviewing more trains in Europe. Thanks for watching.